Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar in Risk and Management Portfolio. My name is Alba Kecha, the organizer of this webinar. Today's webinar will be on enterprise risk management, unsuccessful efforts due to the lack of company strategy, which will be presented by Eddie Vries, a PECB ISO 31000 certified risk manager and trainer with 20 years experience in quality management and more than 12 years experience in enterprise risk management. Understanding why do good companies go badly and that the lack of company strategy can result in unsuccessful efforts and can cause losses is essential for companies. Hence, this live webinar will cover the following topics: the start of any ERM program, link between strategy ERM and ISO 31000, periodic risk review, game loss. Before Eddie begins his presentation, I would like to ask the audience to please write down any questions you may have during the webinar in the chat box on your control panel, and we will respond to a few of them at the end and answer to the remaining through email. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the session. Eddie, you may begin.
Thank you very much, Alba, and I want to say welcome to everyone in the webinar, and it is really such an important element that we need to cover because I see so many organizations not gaining the full benefit from enterprise risk management because they start implementing such processes just at the point where they feel it's necessary and kind of miss the whole element of why enterprise risk management should be part of any organization. Now, I'm just proceeding to the next slide quickly. Now, the three topics that I chose to talk about is where do we start with enterprise risk management within an organization. As you all know, that risk management has been around for a couple of years. However, it kind of seems very immature of organizations and where they start with the ERM program. What I do find is that the enterprise kind of gets lost along the way, and I'm going to talk about that quickly. Then we're going to handle the link between strategy, enterprise risk management, and ISO 31000. And I'm going to handle a couple of points there that I think is of importance in your ERM program. The periodic risk review is very close to my heart purely because of the fact that everybody thinks it should be a periodic thing and not ongoing. So we're going to have a discussion around that as well. So what is the key? What's the start to any enterprise risk management program? And if we go and have a look where risk management finds itself in this concept that everybody talks about, GRC, or governance, risk and compliance, I think one of the biggest sins that's around at the moment is that we lump risk management as a compliance issue rather than a governance issue, and we run our enterprise risk management efforts as compliance. Now, it highlights a couple of dangers for us. For one, is the first thing of governance is how we run our organizations. Now, enterprise risk management efforts definitely gives us the basis to run our organizations well. However, when we go and have a look at standards out there or frameworks, COSO or ISO 31000, we somehow feel that we should run it as a compliance effort. Now, if you run something as a compliance effort within organizations, you stand the danger to get the organization to comply to it and rather utilize it as a tool to enable the performance of the organization, which in fact in itself creates a danger. So the first thing that I would say to any organization starting off their enterprise risk management efforts is enterprise risk management is about the identification and assessment of the environment so that the uncertainty does not deflect the endeavor from the business goals. So the start of our process within risk management is really to understand where we're going as an organization. And if there's no strategy within an organization, your risk management efforts are going to end up just in registers and not necessarily in the correct information. So in today's day and age, we as an organization depend on information to make the right decisions and to take our organization towards this, this excellence that everybody drives to. And if we, like I stated before, if we run this not as a performance enabler, but rather running it as a compliance effort, we're going to lose sight of that. So as we start off with our program, there's just 3 questions that I normally pose to management. And the very first question is our organization likely to achieve its objectives? It is quite amazing how many organizations I go to and I go and evaluate the enterprise risk management efforts, and at the first outset, they don't have a company strategy and objectives. It's not defined down, and if it is defined, it's not communicated with the organization. Just out of a point of interest, if you do not tell an organization where you want it to go, the organization is going to be stagnant. So it's very important for us to communicate the strategy and objectives to an organization so that everybody pulls in the same direction. The next thing is, are we managing the organization at significant risks? Now, many organizations answer yes to this every time I ask them or their management teams, I pose this question to them. And once again, the significant risks is not really related to their strategy or their objectives of the organization. Now, in itself, we are then missing the boat, clearly. If I call it significant risks, but it's not related to the performance of my organization, are they really significant? So one of the things organizations should guard against is everybody is talking about the top-down approach and a bottoms-up approach in creating their risk environment. The danger with this is I create a marriage after the fact. And I'll explain my reasoning behind it. If I create a bottoms-up approach and I say risk A, B, and C, and I pose the question, does it have an effect on my objectives? That should be a qualification criteria of including my risks or excluding my risks. However, companies change this around and they say, so which objective can I link this to? So once again, my question is hardly answered in a way that satisfies the actual objective of enterprise risk management. So question 2, are we managing the organization's significant risks? Question 3 then is related to the opportunities that is posed to an organization. So can our organization recognize opportunities and act on them accordingly? Once again, out of experience, so many organizations I deal with see risk as a negative thing and not really identifying the opportunities in managing our risk around that. These 3 questions makes management uncomfortable in their efforts in enterprise risk management, but they're very important because these should be the ones that we should be able to answer if we relate it to enterprise risk management. I'm just going to the next slide. So what we've done is we've gone through a process of just mapping how a risk looks like if we think in enterprise risk management terms, and how can we relate this to to our enterprise risk management efforts. Now, at the start, we all agree now that the organizational objective should be the starting point of our enterprise risk management. So if there is no strategy, there is no objectives, we should ask ourselves, why do we go and identify this risk related to it? Now, the second part to this picture then, if we go and have a look at specifically this part, is we need to go and understand what the definition of a risk is for us to apply this correctly. And the definition of a risk really goes around this. It says it's a potential event, future event, that could have an effect on company objectives. So there's the company objectives and a clear link between the two. But the starting point is definitely the organizational company objectives. If we have the objectives, then it becomes quite easy to start identifying our risk environment around that. However, if we identify these events, many companies feel that elimination should be the objective. So eliminate the risk, get rid of it, rather than managing the risk to an acceptable level. For us to get to that, though, we have to go through a long process of definition first. And the next area of definition is definitely the contributing factors. Now, that is typically a term that comes from COSO, but ISO 31000 refers to it as causal factors. But basically what it is what could cause this risk to occur. And if we understand that, we can then develop our elements which is related to our controls, and it'll be a lot better focused if we understand what causes risks to occur. The next thing that we have to give attention is what has happened in the past. Now, so many times we disregard the past and don't give it much attention because there's always a bright future ahead of us. Now, I say this tongue-in-cheek, absolutely, because organizations always is future-related. But it's very important for us to understand, has these risks occurred? Have we been successful in managing them? And if we do nothing differently, it's roundabout going to materialize roundabout the same in the future. And the next area of definition is the proper risk description. Now, it seems like us risk professionals have been trained to say things in less than 15 words. Now, that creates a problem in itself, because 99% of the time where decisions are made by top management, which doesn't necessarily have the context. Risk analysis and weighting, very important area, and the one area, the qualitative assessment, is definitely one that we give a whole lot of attention to, and that's really just the impact and likelihood or consequence of a risk. But the qualitative assessment is one that we really shoot short of in our enterprise risk management efforts. The qualitative assessment is really where we give attention to the monetary effect that a risk would have on our organization. Risk appetite, that is something that we can discuss until the nth degree, so I'm not going to give that too much attention. However, key risk indicators, I find organizations are lacking in defining as well. In some industry sectors like financial and insurance, they're quite good in that, but the rest of the industry types out there, they really struggle to utilize key risk indicators. Now, if we take this picture in a nutshell, it is basically the information that somebody would need to make an informed decision on risks. Now, you can measure yourself and your enterprise risk management efforts within your organization to decide does it have this amount of information in, and can I make the right decisions if I don't have this The next thing is basically to get a process that one can go through to understand a risk, and we just created this flowchart very easily, and it starts off with the company objectives on the left-hand side on top. You then proceed to asking what potential future events could stop us from achieving that, and define that in a lot more detail, which includes a risk description, a risk owner, because ownership is very important in risk management, risk category, is it strategic, operational, and then defining key risk indicators. So what are we going to measure to see if this risk is getting better or worse over time? After that description, we start defining the contributing factors, or causal factors, if you may. Do the risk analysis and weighting. I particularly am fond of the inherent and residual view of risk, because I want to see if my control environment actually does make a difference. And then lastly, comparing that to my risk appetite, and then creating actions if necessary. So actions are further interventions, and one of the biggest mistakes organizations make as well is they utilize actions in the calculation of their risk analysis, which is not a fair reflection, because an action or a plan can only make a difference until it has been completed. So please take note of that action plans should be disregarded in your risk analysis and weighting residually. Anyway. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So is there a link between strategy, enterprise risk management, ISO 31000, and where is that link? How do we take that forward? And I'm just going to go to the next slide. So the start of any enterprise risk management program is really this. In order to make money, you have to take risks, and it's quite easy to identify who stated this, and it's a rich man. Managing a risk goes around creating profits. Or, on the other side, not managing your risk would create you, in your organizations, creating losses. So there's a second saying that goes with the first one, and it goes in this order. It says, if you do not manage your risk, you will lose money. And it's quite easy to identify who said that as well. It was a clever man. Now we need to get our organizations to be clever in their approaches in enterprise risk management, rather than just taking the risk, if it's calculated or uncalculated, in creating the profit for organizations. So the risk management effort should be focused in not just making money, taking the right risks, but also managing those risks so that we don't lose money along the way. Now, how do we manage risk? First of all, we need to decide on what process are we going to utilize and what framework. Secondly, we need people to do this. Unfortunately, we are not fully automated yet. That is very far in the future, so people still work in organizations. So for us to be successful in our risk management efforts or endeavors within organizations, we have to engage people in our organizations. I always say create followers, or do not create followers, rather create believers, and believers will take on what is necessary. If we create followers, we're going to end up in a scenario once again where we comply. So some type of audit action will try and verify if enterprise risk management is implemented, and it starts running as a compliance effort within our organization. Now that's the wrong end to be in. If you get people to believe in the methodology and the application of enterprise risk management in creating value, they would start executing this out of free will and rather as a compliance effort. So I've chosen ISO 31000 specifically to create our process environment as a framework. And what I said was, so let's just take a couple of fundamentals out of ISO 31000 and say, why is it there? Why is it being created as a framework? And what should the characteristics be of an enterprise risk management endeavor within our organizations? And it can really be encapsulated in 7 points, starting with the first one, which says it is a process which is ongoing and flowing throughout an entity. So at first go, we have to understand that it goes throughout an entity, throughout an enterprise. It is ongoing, and you'll see the last topic I'll talk about is people think that risk assessment should be periodic, and we'll talk about that a bit later. And it needs to be a process. So there needs to be some type of method or toolbox that the organization can utilize to execute on what we as an organization is expecting of the organization in terms of the enterprise risk management program. The next fundamental is it's affected by people at every level of the organization. Now, because enterprise risk management or risk management as such is seen as such a specialized environment, sometimes it is driven within organizations just at a level where it doesn't involve the whole organization, but it's really driven by management or senior management within the organization. The problem, however, is the rest of the organization sits with the information that we require to execute our enterprise risk management fundamentals. So we need to engage the whole organization, and a strategy for the implementation of enterprise risk management does not include the whole organization over a period of time, you're gonna miss the boat. It's applied in strategy settings. So it doesn't happen after the strategy. It happens during the strategy, saying, depending on what cycle your organization is finding yourself at the moment, are they in a very aggressive growth phase? Then obviously they will take and bear a higher risk than what it is if it is in a stabilization phase or a declining phase. Then the strategy for risk and risk taking is going to be a lot less. So once again, I want to reiterate this point that it is not an afterthought, but rather a thought within your strategy setting process. It's applied across the enterprise, and I think I've mentioned that more than enough already, that it goes throughout the organization. It's designed to identify potential events. And why I've chosen that one is specifically, I find organizations, what they do is they now understand it's about strategy and about defining objectives. And what they do is they take the objective and write it in a negative way, and they would then say that is the risk. It takes it away from one of the fundamentals, which is definitely to identify the potential events that could stop me from achieving those or hamper me or have an effect on me achieving my desired outcome. So it is not the negative of the desired outcome. Able to provide reasonable assurance, and it's geared towards the achievement of objectives. May they be company, personal objectives, whatever that scenario might be. So if we take these fundamentals into our enterprise risk management and take ISO 31000, it becomes quite easy for us to start assessing. So how well are we doing with these principles? Are we satisfying these principles in our enterprise risk management efforts? And if not, we can utilize this as the identification to adjust our ERM programs within organizations. I'm just moving to the next slide. Now, everybody must be quite familiar with this picture. And these are the principles specifically out of Clause 3 from ISO 31000. And it says enterprise risk management should create value. If it is painful for your organization, then you're doing it incorrectly. So it should create value for you as an organization. It should be an integral part of organizations' processes. It should be part of the decision making. Explicitly addresses uncertainty. Why? Because we try and identify these potential future events and try and assess the consequence and likelihood of it so that we can manage it accordingly. It's systematic, structured, based on best available information, can be tailored, takes human and cultural factors into account, transparent and inclusive, dynamic because it changes as your organization changes, and it facilitates continual improvement, which now with the release of 2015 version of 9001, it becomes quite an interesting exercise in running enterprise risk management within that sphere or together with that endeavor. So this part is just clause 4 of ISO 31000, and I'm absolutely sure that you know this clause as well. However, I want to highlight when we start implementing our enterprise risk management programs, we normally start at this point. We disregard the mandate. We go through a very brief process of design, and we then just start running the process, which I'm just going to go to the next slide quickly, which is this part, which everybody is very familiar with, which is the process, and we think that should guide our implementation in enterprise risk management. It is, as the saying goes, it's 80% planning and 20% execution, and we have to make sure that we get our planning efforts in our mandate and commitment and designing our framework and managing the risk accordingly. We have to get that right before we go into the process of just starting to implement the risk management process as such. If we go to monitoring and review of the framework, that's the next part, and then continual improvement in our efforts. If we have a look at the process, implementing the process, the first part is establishing the context, and establishing the context we take as designing the framework for managing risk. So there's a bit of confusion that I found out in organizations in where the actual implementation starts. I guess it is very important for me to mention as well, mandating commitment does not mean the CEO, MD, or Vice President sends out an email saying that we're starting in our endeavors in enterprise risk management. But it's really a committed mandate from management saying this is a practice we want to engage with in our organization to help us achieve. I'm just going to the next slide. So establishing the context, the risk management process should be aligned with the organizational culture, processes, and structures. Now, there's no one-fit-all risk management process. That doesn't exist. There's concepts that's common. But the process should be customized around the organizational culture and processes that's already in existence. And I find that organizations struggle with that. They think there's a one-size-fits-all scenario. Establishing the external context, which relates to anything external to the organization, culture, political, economics, and I found the PECB concept working quite well there. establishing the internal context of the organization, which is everything internal to the organization, and then the risk management processes, which is the objectives, the strategies, and the activities within the organization. Then lastly, we will start looking at the risk assessment methods. Now, it's quite interesting, the risk assessment methods we normally take as the policies, but it's really how do we assess a risk, and that is at a later stage only. Developing the risk criteria, which is the risk appetite levels and ratings, and that'll give us a much better idea in creating your environment where the identification of or the classification of your risk becomes important. So I'm just moving along quickly. So risk identification. When we talk about the risk identification part in ISO 31000, the concepts we have to implement here and test ourselves on is the first one. Is our identification done in terms of possible non-achievement of objectives? If it is not, we should ask ourselves once again why this exists. Why are we doing risk management? Is it to help our organizations to achieve its strategy, or is it to create it as a compliance effort? Now, once again, you can run it as a compliance effort within your organization and employ multiple people to try and facilitate it, but you're never going to get the benefit out of the risk management efforts. So it has to be to help organizations achieve rather than just a repeatable process. It is not just strategic based. It should cover the whole organization. Risk management is part of process. It's part of projects. It's part of the strategies. It should have a set of identification tools. And what I found over this time was that organizations don't have tools to identify risks, and they think one of the tools or the tool to utilize is a workshop environment. Now, if we think of workshops, the result of a workshop is only as good as the facilitator that's in it and the participation of everybody within the workshop. I'm not saying it is all bad in a workshop, but I'm saying it should not be just the only tool. We should have tools that the organization can utilize themselves, not through facilitation, but executing those tools to identify these risks. Information is key to risk management. So relevant information at the right time, received by the right people, can go far. Risk identification should also include the risk of not pursuing opportunities. So should we decide not to pursue opportunities, what risk do we face with that? Now, although this can be seen as a set of qualification criteria for risk identification, it should not be seen as an exhaustive list or the only list. These are only points that I've highlighted out of it that I've seen organizations struggle with. So is risk a bad thing? Organizations feel that risk should be eliminated. So if you have a risk matrix and a risk is in the red, the general tendency of organizations or people within organizations is to try and manage this risk from this red area to somewhere where it's green. Now, the right idea is actually to get the risk managed to a level where it is acceptable to an organization, not necessarily elimination. Now, I guess this comes really from the health and safety environment where risks identified with operations are normally seen or is normally seen to be taken to eliminate the risk or get the risk as low as possible. But that is not necessarily what is required of all risks. So in the back of your mind, you should keep it in mind. So what is the return? Should I manage this risk properly to an acceptable level? I just included a little cartoon there for you. It was said it was a calculated risk, and we forgot to carry the one. And that is the absolute importance of information related to risk management. So is risk a bad thing? No. Risk not being managed is a bad thing. So what is this periodic risk review? And in my view, if you have a schedule of risk reviews and it is facilitated by a third party, or the game is lost if that's your only tool. And the synergy behind that is that if you think a risk is going to wait until the next periodic review to show itself, that in itself creates a problem, because risks wait for no one. The management of risk also needs to be top of mind. That brings me to the next point, where organizations do not understand that, or they have the argument that, but I've got a day job as well. Where do you expect me to find the time to complete these registers and highlight these processes? Well, in my view, enterprise risk management should be their day job. It has all the benefits of that an organization requires to perform. First of all, it is absolutely performance driven, because your start is objective based. It is driven in an organization in terms of non-performance of those and management. Quite interestingly, if I go around to organizations and I ask them, where's your risk register, and they say they don't have any risks, and I'm absolutely sure for those of you who consult, you've come across this as well. There is no risk. I normally just ask for their management meeting minutes, and all the risks are taken up there. So who, why, or who, what, and how in the process? Well, it needs to be a process. It needs to be ongoing, and it needs to flow throughout the organization. This is not my opinion. These are the fundamentals that's mentioned within 31,000. So an ongoing process means it happens every day throughout the organization. It is not a periodic review. It is not something that we have to do quarterly because we have to report on it. No, it should be an everyday task. I think we started to confuse reporting periods with the risk management process. It should be affected by people at every level of the organization. And why is that important? Well, for one is, I told you, if you create believers, the organization will believe in the process and utilize it to their benefit. And it needs to be run at every organization. If we think of management systems out there specifically quality related, when we go and implement a quality management system in an organization, we don't just engage the board, or we engage senior management. We engage the whole organization, because it requires an effort from everyone to be successful. So risk management, for some reason, didn't think that it should be applied by everyone in the organization. Then the second or the third point is well-defined roles and responsibilities. Because if there is some type of risk management competence within an organization, management would gladly give you this process to execute. Merely because of the fact it's sometimes not well understood. It's sometimes not well understood how it can assist management in running the day-to-day tasks. So I'm just moving to the next slide. So when I say who owns what as part of this risk management process, as I said, management would be absolutely willing to show or pass the content onto a risk management competence, saying the risk management process is yours, and you know what, you're going to run it for us, and never take responsibility for that environment. Now, for enterprise risk management to be successful, they need to understand that the risks identified are their risks. The process in running that is owned by the risk management competence, and that's a clear distinction between the two. What I find in organizations is that the risk management competence takes responsibility and accountability for the risks as well, and terms and definitions sometimes comes out where statements are made, don't worry, the risk management department will sort this out for us. It's actually the other way around. The risk management competence should make the statement, don't worry, management will utilize our process to sort their issue out. It's a clear distinction on where the accountability and responsibility lies within risk management. Content, the risk, lies with management. The process lies with the risk management competence. So what is this? This management oversight and review then? Where does that go? What does it require from us? Well, management's accountable for risk. Now that we all agree on that, and ownership is clearly business. They take responsibility for it. And when we talk about updates, we should consider the following things. Well, changes in business objectives, and organizations change strategies. It is obvious that they do change strategies. They change systems. They change processes. And it should be, as these changes occur, the risk management profile should not follow that, but go pre to that process. And that concludes my presentation. I want to end up with this in stating that enterprise risk management, the concept, although it fits into governance and although it is classed in this grouping governance, risk, and compliance, the benefits we can realize for organizations as risk professionals are endless. And if we understand that the process should give us the backbone for the identification and enablement of company strategies, it will enable organizations to achieve. Alba?
Mr. Eddy, thank you very much for this excellent presentation. Now it's time for our question and answer session. We have received a few questions, which we'll be answering to them now. The first question is, which would be an effective management tool to identify and analyze risk of enterprise?
Okay, so first of all, the concept of the process should be followed. Now, the strategy should be there, and then the question to the strategy. So, what's going to stop us from achieving that? The tools that could be utilized for that could be something like FMEA, or which is failure mode and effect analysis, or even root cause analysis as a process. But the root cause analysis is normally done after something has gone wrong. So you need to apply the thinking of the root cause analysis in a preemptive way rather than a reactive way, if that makes any sense. So what you want to do is put these into a toolbox for management. So the failure mode and effect analysis, you can also utilize the failure mode, effect, and criticality analysis, which is utilized widely in the motor manufacturing arena or industry. They take into account what could fail and how they're going to go and manage that. Now remember, I want you to guard against this. If you make the process too complex, and we can keep each other busy with abbreviations and definitions for days. The problem is the organization is not at the same level as risk professionals, and the other way around, because it is a professional area. So what you want to do is create an environment that's easy enough for an organization to execute on, and it's really a chain of thought rather than giving them intense tools. Then grow the maturity in your risk assessment in the organization in adding tools to this toolbox as you go along. But if you create all of these tools right at the start, you're going to have a non-engaged organization, because it's going to seem like it is just too a daunting task to execute.
Thank you, Eddie, for your answer. The second question is, are standards for implementing ERM different for private and public companies?
No, not at all. It is the same process. If you apply the principles, and it is clearly stated, it's clearly stated in 31,000, and it is clearly stated in COSO as well, that it applies to any entity. It doesn't matter if you apply a private, public, or state entity as such. So the same process applies for all of them. There might be, in some countries, legislated requirements that might make it a bit different. But from an enterprise risk management perspective, it is all the same process.
Thank you. The next question is saying, what do you think? What is more important, risk management process performance or risk management effectiveness? Proper managing of risk or proper risk management?
Proper risk management, definitely, and I'll qualify my answer. If you do, once again, we can make this process as complex as we like, and you'll have an organization not engaging, or we can make the process being executed, creating value for the organization. So proper risk management, in my view, would have more importance. But in your proper risk management, it needs a couple of fundamentals, and I've mentioned that fundamentals in my presentation in one of the first slides. That would be my opinion.
Thank you again. The next question is, how does a company determine its risk appetite?
Okay, risk appetite is quite a big debate worldwide at the moment, and there's a lot of definitions that goes around. But just to explain or put risk appetite in brief context quickly, it is how much risk an organization can consume in terms of creating the value that they're planning, and that is a very simplistic definition. So how do I define that risk appetite? Now, if you're in the insurance industry or you in the financial sector, it becomes quite easy because there's rules around it, and you can say I can insure or reinsure according to certain ratios, and that'll become part of your risk appetite. You can't go beyond that. Same with credit, giving credit to companies and people. However, most organizations outside of that business sectors finds it very difficult because risk appetite is the cumulative effect of all the risks together. And one thing we miss about risk appetite is that there's two sides of risk appetite. There's a coin, and on the one side of the coin is called the qualitative risk appetite, and that's the matrix that we all know, and normally scales of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 or 1 to 7 on impact and likelihood or consequence and likelihood, and the one times the other will give us some type of result that we will place on some type of color chart and based on that, we'll decide if it's in our appetite or outside of our appetite. But the other side of that coin, and it's the same coin, is called the quantitative risk appetite, and that is where we take the consequence in monetary loss. We say how much money will this cost us should the risk occur, and based on that we can make a much more informed decision or the totality of risk. So how do you calculate that? Well, it is not an easy task, and oversimplicity will just create confusion. But there's no one formula that you can utilize to say this is going to be my risk appetite. It's going to be per organization and the type of organization. So if you once again find your organization in a high growth phase, you're going to take on more risk. So your risk appetite will go up. And in monetary value, we'll say we'll put, argument's sake, an X amount at risk to get the organization to grow. And if you've got a very low growth target, your risk appetite will be lower. Risk appetites in different industries would be different as well. So it's a very difficult question to answer if there is not a actual company coupled to it. But if you are looking for one formula to suit all, there is nothing like that.
Thank you again, Eddie, for this highly informative webinar, and I want to thank all the attendees as well who have taken time of their busy schedule to participate. I hope and I'm sure you all learned something new today. This webinar is also recorded and can be found on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to check back on our upcoming webinars on topics of your interest by visiting our website or social media pages www.pecb.com. Meet you all again same time next Monday on a topic of aligning ISO 21500 and Prince 2. I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. Until then, have a great week. Thank you again, Eddie.
Thank you very much.